Hey y'all, Melissa here with you today, and today's project is a little bit of holiday glitz. I sewed up this shimmery sequin skirt, and I'm going to have some tips for you today on working with sequin fabric. This skirt is fully lined and it has an invisible zipper in it. Now I sewed this from a skirt pattern based on my own measurements, and in order for you to be able to do the same, you're going to need to check out the link below to how to draft a skirt. And then you're going to want to draft yourself a skirt with darts in it and a knit lining piece without darts. Both of those things are shown in that video. So go ahead and do that, and then meet me back at the camera to see how to put this sequin skirt together. Just as I explained in that skirt video and post, I have done a knit dartless lining. So I've modified that skirt sloper to have no dart and be made out of knit fabric for the lining. And then I've used the skirt sloper with the darts for the outer part of my skirt. And I have gone ahead, and if you look at the bottom a little bit here, instead of coming straight down on the sides of my skirt, I have taken my sloper in just a little bit so this has more of a pencil shape and not a straight skirt shape. So a few tips about sewing with sequins before we get started. First of all, you can see here's my skirt sloper that I used pattern for this skirt. Marking tools, I like to use markers on the back side of the sequins to mark things like darts. When you're sewing with sequins, you're going to want to choose a pattern that has as few seams as possible, just to make your life easier, and you also want to make sure that your pattern is fully lined. There really isn't a good way to finish sequins and have them be comfortable next to the body, so I always like to incorporate a lining if I'm going to be sewing with sequins. Now you'll notice the sequins on the fabric that I am using here, these are sewn to a mesh backing, and they're distributed in a variated pattern, which means that no matter which direction I turn it, the sequins kind of look the same. There isn't one direction that all the sequins are going. If there is, and many sequin fabrics do have a direction that the sequins are going, that's referred to as the nap. So if you have one of those directional sequin fabrics, you want to make sure that all your pieces get cut out with the sequins going the same way. You want to be careful about that. Another quality of the particular fabric that I've chosen is that the sequins are really tiny. They're just not very big. Because of that, I did some experimenting with my scraps, and I've determined that I don't need to remove the sequins from the seam allowances or from within the darts here like I would need to do if I was working with a fabric that had larger sequins. So if you're working with something that has larger sequins, you do want to take seam ripper or a very small pair of embroidery scissors and start snipping those sequins out of the seam allowances. It can be a tedious process, and this is another reason why I recommend, if you're sewing with sequins, choose a pattern that has as few seams as possible. Another tip in working with sequins is it's going to dull your scissors and anything that it comes into contact with. You do not want to sew sequins on your serger. It will dull your serger blade, and that thread wrapped around won't finish the edges where you don't need to line it anyways. You're going to end up with half sequins caught in the serger seam. And I know that because I've tried that. My scissors are due for a sharpening anyway, so I went ahead and used my good scissors to cut it out. You may want to use an old pair of scissors to cut out your sequins though, because again, that's going to dull your scissors. We've already mentioned using the markers as a great tool here, and as you could see when I had my pattern piece up here, instead of trying to do tracing paper or trace it in any way, I cut out my dart and then I could just trace the inside with the marker to transfer the markings onto my fabric. In addition to the sequins for the outer skirt and the lining, I am going to be using an invisible zipper on this, so make sure you have that on hand as well. The first step to sewing my skirt is to pin the darts and sew the darts. So what I like to do when I am pinning darts is take a pin and go directly through side to side. Again, if you are sewing with bigger sequins on your fabric than what I am working with, you're going to need to remove your sequins from within that dart area. Once I have pins stuck through my dart from side to side, then it's easier for me to fold up the dart using those pins as guides and to add more pins as necessary to form the dart. Also realize that if you're adding darts to sequins, that it's not going to be perfectly flat at the bottom of the sequin. So you need to allow for that. When you've sewn the darts, this is what it's going to look like. So here's the other side of my skirt with the darts sewn in. You can see how I can't get perfectly flat at the bottom of that because there are sequins in the way. If you're working with larger sequins, that's where you might want to keep some of them on hand and sew them by hand onto the bottom of the dart. But this is flat enough for my purposes here. On the back side, I didn't cut open the darts or do anything differently to them after I stitched them. They are going to have a little bit of bulk in there, and again, that's something I anticipated. This is why I chose a very simple design for this skirt. Once you've got the darts sewn on both sides, we're going to be installing the zipper in this skirt, and instead of showing you how to install an invisible zipper on these sequins, I'm going to link to a different post below that shows you exactly how step by step to put in an invisible zipper. So I'm going to do that invisible zipper, and it's going to go into the left side seam of my skirt. That allowed me to eliminate needing a back seam, a center back seam on this skirt. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I sewed the darts in my skirt and I inserted the zipper. The process for inserting an invisible zipper in a sequin fabric is exactly the same as inserting it in regular fabric. The only thing that I might suggest is you might want to sew just a teeny bit further away from the coils than you would with a thinner fabric, because the turn of the cloth is going to be thicker with a sequin fabric. And again, if you're working with a fabric that has larger sequins, you're going to want to remove the sequins from within that seam allowance to sew on the zipper before you put in the zipper, and then save a lot of those sequins and you'll have to hand stitch them back next to the zipper. This is one of the reasons I chose a sequin fabric with very small sequins. They're just easier to work with. So I didn't have to remove any sequins, although depending on how the zipper continues to perform, you can see there's a couple that stick out and catch in the zipper. I may go ahead and remove just a couple of those to keep them from catching in my zipper. Now that I've got those steps done, what I want to do is put my skirt right sides together, and I'm going to sew down this seam. A few more tips for sewing sequins when you get to the machine. I'm using regular polyester all-purpose thread and a regular 80-12 universal needle. If your sequins are bigger or if your machine is having trouble, you may want to switch to a larger needle, a 90-14 or a 116 needle. And you may also want to consider using invisible thread. Sometimes that works better on the sequins. Sometimes it breaks a lot though, so it depends on your particular sequin fabric. You may also want to increase the stitch length. I'm using the default 2.5 millimeter stitch length that my machine goes to, but sometimes a longer stitch length will work better if you're having trouble with thread breakage. Okay, y'all, once you've got that other side seam sewn, this is what your skirt is going to look like. And we can go ahead and turn this right side out. Another little tip or thing to know about working with sequins is that you're not going to want to vacuum until after your project is over, because there will be little pieces of shedding sequins everywhere in your sewing room. So just push them aside and give the whole place a good sweeping or a vacuum after you are finished with your project. So here's what the skirt looks like right now. This is actually the back side that's facing up at the moment. I'm going to put that aside. And this is the lining of the skirt. And I've gone ahead and I've sewn one side seam all the way down, and then one side seam I've left open in the same spot as the zipper, and then sewn it the rest of the way down. So what I want to do is place my lining right sides together with my skirt, and I want to have it unzipped when I do this. So I'm placing the skirt inside the lining, and I am matching up the opening that I've left in my lining with the zipper part of the skirt. And then I'm going to go around and match the side seams of the lining and the skirt, and then pin the rest of the way around. When I get to my darts, I am going to be pushing my darts open towards the side seams. Not open because I didn't cut them in the back, but I'm pushing them in the direction of the side seam. Okay, and once I've got that all pinned up, I am going to stitch around the waistband here so that I can turn this lining to the inside. Once you have finished sewing around the top of the skirt, this is what it's going to look like. And let's go ahead and turn this right side out and push the lining to the inside. Now, on a typical skirt, I would recommend understitching or top stitching up here at the facing to keep the facing hidden. However, because this is sequins, I don't do that. And the reason is, this is also the reason why I used a lining that is similar to my skin tone. The reason I don't top stitch is because sometimes the waistband, depending on what you're wearing, what shirt, whether you've got it tucked in, the waistband can be irritating because of those sequins. So when I've got the lining free to roll, I can roll it out if I need to. This is also why I like to use a stretch lining instead of a solid non-stretch lining, because that gives me a little more freedom to roll the waist as I need to. So what we need to do now is finish the skirt. To finish the lining and the zipper area now, what we need to do is we need to pin the lining with the zipper sandwiched in between, and I'm going to stitch down as close as I can get to the zipper on this side. And by close to the zipper, I mean I'm trying to get close to where the zipper splits. I'm not trying to get close to the coils. I'm actually going to stitch on the outer edges here. I need to do that on the other side as well. So I'm going to stitch here and then here. Once the lining is stitched to the zipper, then I can turn this whole thing right side out and we can work on hemming. Before we get to the hem, however, if your fabric is prone to fraying, you may want to go ahead and right here on the inside of the zipper, hand stitch it to the bottom of the zipper. To hem the skirt, you want to cut the lining so that it is 1 inch shorter than the length of the skirt, and you want the skirt to be 1 inch longer than your final length. And then what you're going to do is you're going to fold up that 1 inch on your outer fabric. You're going to pull down the lining. We're making sure that there's a taut line from the top to the bottom here. And then go ahead and pin all the way around the skirt. This is another reason I like to use this knit lining, because I don't have to worry about the lining unraveling or needing to have a finished edge. If you've used a different kind of fabric that does need to be finished, you can fold the lining up like that. Now that I've got the hem pinned up all the way around, let's take a look at how to stitch this. So I've got a hand sewing needle threaded, and I'm going to come up through just the inside fold of that sequin fabric and then through the lining, and I'll keep repeating that stitch. So I'll hand hem this all the way around.